Pot versus alcohol. What do the experts say? We expect that some readers will be tempted to disregard or discount the analysis in this chapter based on an assumption that we have skewed the data in order to advance our political agenda. For that reason, we have decided to close this discussion of the relative risks and dangers posed by the use of cannabis and alcohol by summarizing the views of experts who have also reviewed this issue. Let's see what they have to say. In the mid-1990s, the World Health Organization commissioned a team of scientists to compare the health and societal consequences of cannabis use compared to other drugs, including alcohol, nicotine, and opiates. After comparing and quantifying the magnitude of dangers associated with these drugs, the researchers concluded, overall, most of these risks associated with marijuana are small to moderate in size. In aggregate, they are unlikely to produce public health problems comparable in scale to those currently produced by alcohol and tobacco. On existing patterns of use, cannabis poses a much less serious public health problem than is currently posed by alcohol and tobacco in Western societies. The WHO ultimately removed these findings from its final 1997 report, Cannabis, a Health Perspective and Research Agenda, after allegedly receiving political pressure from the United States, which argued that such conclusions could undermine its ongoing criminal prohibition of marijuana. French scientists at the State Medical Research Institute, INSERM, published a similar review in 1998. Researchers categorized legal and illegal drugs into three distinct categories: those that pose the greatest threat to public health, those that pose moderate harms to the public, and those substances that pose little to no danger. Not surprisingly, alcohol, heroin, and cocaine were placed in the most dangerous category, while tobacco and hallucinogens were categorized as posing moderate risks to the public's health. Investigators determined that cannabis posed the least danger to public health. In 1989, a research advisory panel for the state of California reviewed the health effects of pot and alcohol. They concluded, an objective consideration of marijuana shows that it is responsible for less damage to the individual and to society than are alcohol and cigarettes. Predictably, the state's Attorney General refused to publicly release the report. In 2002, a special Canadian Senate committee completed an exhaustive review of marijuana and health, finding that scientific evidence overwhelmingly indicates that cannabis is substantially less harmful than alcohol and should be treated not as a criminal issue but as a social and public health issue. Senators concluded their report by calling for the legalization of cannabis to consumers aged 16 and older, a request that was subsequently ignored by the majority of Parliament. In 2007, the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare hired a team of scientists to assess the impact of alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs on public health. Predictably, researchers found that the consumption of alcohol was a significant contributor to death and disease. Alcohol harm was responsible for 3.2% of the total burden of disease and injury in Australia. They concluded, of the 14 risk factors examined, alcohol was responsible for the greatest amount of burden in males under the age of 45. By comparison, cannabis use was responsible for 0 deaths and only 0.2% of the estimated total burden of disease and injury in Australia. That same year, a team of experts conducted a similar review for the esteemed British medical journal The Lancet. After evaluating the physical and social harms of numerous legal and illegal drugs, the authors determined that alcohol posed far greater health and safety risks than cannabis. Finally, in 2008, a team of researchers commissioned by the nonpartisan British think tank the Beckley Foundation published a report assessing marijuana's risk to health. They concluded the public health impact of contemporary patterns of cannabis use are modest by comparison with those of other illicit drugs such as the opioids, or with alcohol. In the former case, this reflects the absence of fatal overdose risk from cannabis. In the latter case, it reflects the much lower risks of death from cannabis than alcohol-impaired driving. fewer adverse effects on health, lower rates of regular use of intoxication for cannabis than for alcohol, and the lower rate of persistence of cannabis use into older adulthood. The report's authors ultimately recommended, as do we, that the public's health and safety would best be served by amending federal drug control laws to allow for the sale and use of cannabis in a manner similar to alcohol.